Good evening, my friends. Beginning this 25th Sunday of the year, we take up the last group of Gospel readings for this liturgical year. It will cover this Sunday up to the 33rd Sunday, culminating in the solemnity of Christ the King. The characteristics of the readings for these coming Sundays will be mostly eschatological in character. Meaning to say, they speak of Jesus' teachings on the last things and the final days. We will again hear parables, the first and last Sundays, and in the middle Sundays, the final confrontation of Jesus with the scribes and Pharisees. We shall hear the parable of the workers in the vineyard for this Sunday. This story is the least favorite among us priests and preachers because of the difficult and somewhat controversial message it seems to contain. Again, besides being a parable with its already unusual plot and elements, the idea that God is unjust and unfair is really challenging to explain. That's the impression people can easily get from reading this parable. But you see, there are many more insights contained in this story that I can point out to you so that we can arrive at the true and meaningful message of the parable of the workers in the vineyard. One more interesting point is this. This parable again deals with money. Remember the huge debt of money owed by the servant last Sunday? This time, the money concerns the wages of the laborers. You might be interested to know that almost all the parables about money in the Gospels are found in St. Matthew's Gospel. The parable of the talents, the parable of the unmerciful servant, and this parable. In the calling of the apostles in Matthew chapter 10 verse 3, Matthew was described as a tax collector. That's the reason why St. Matthew was very familiar with money and money stories. This is another internal proof that this gospel might really be from the hand of St. Matthew the Apostle. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Why did Jesus tell this parable? Well, the previous chapter gives us the context. In Matthew chapter 19, we have the story of the rich young man who declined to follow Jesus because he was very much attached to his wealth. That prompted Peter, again, the first one to speak, to remind Jesus that they left everything to follow him. What will be the reward now? And just like before, Jesus impressed Peter by saying that as a reward, those who follow him will receive 100-fold of everything they left behind. Notice here that Peter was already comparing himself to those who did not follow Jesus, like the young man. He was as if saying to Jesus, "Look, Lord, since we, your disciples, left everything and now have nothing, and everyone else still possesses everything, we should be compensated and treated well more than everyone else." Confronted with this attitude of Peter, Jesus had to tell this parable. It was standard practice at the time of Jesus, and even today, to hire temporary laborers on a daily basis. The hirer would go early in the day to look for people who needed work. The earlier the better, so that he could get the best workers. It usually happens that those who are up early are the more diligent and industrious ones, while the ones who go out late to be hired might be less conscientious. Ang tunay na masikap ay maagang nagsisikap. All of us are laborers under our Master, who is God and constantly looking for us. He wants to send us out into His vineyard to work for Him. But He isn't only looking for us, He is also looking out for us. God provides for whatever we need. So like in the parable, the landowner promises the daily wage, 1 denarius, remember last week, to all that he hires, an image of what is necessary to sustain one's daily life. The workers are not given more than enough for the day, up to the next day. Otherwise, they will not work anymore the following day. The image of daily wage is crucial in this parable. It's not only an economic reality. It is God's providential care for His people. Just like in the Our Father, when we ask Him to give us our daily bread, here, the Master doesn't give more, nor He gives less. He gives all that will sustain us for the day. Saving and hoarding do not belong to the economics of God. If we do God's work as His workers, He promises to sustain us. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too, go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock, and did likewise. The ancient practice of counting hours is by the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, and the 9th hour, which corresponds to our modern 9 o'clock in the morning, 12 noon, and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The landowner already went early in the morning, which is around 6 a.m., when the sun is already up and people begin their work. Our story tells us that the Master goes out again around 9 a.m., 12 noon, and 3 p.m., and still finds men standing idle, and so tells them to go and work in the vineyard, with the promise of a wage that is just, a just wage. What is a just wage for the landowner? He has only one category of payment for those who work for him: the daily wage. I will provide you for whatever you need for the day. Also notice that the Master doesn't waste time explaining the work to the laborers. He just sends them off to the vineyard. What is this saying to us? The Master wants more laborers, as many as he can get into his vineyard, no matter the work to be done. People first before qualifications. A preference for presence more than competence. Send off first, ask questions later. Begin to take note of this unusual character of the landowner. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too, go into my vineyard." In the English language, there is the phrase, the 11th hour. meaning at the latest possible moment. In our story, the master still goes out at 5 p.m., which is the 11th hour in ancient terminology, the last possible time to hire people before work ends. Do you notice the strangeness of this part? Why will the owner still go out and hire more people when it's almost closing time? He will just be wasting his effort and money. But he is not your ordinary owner, isn't he? He just wants people into his vineyard. Presence more than expense. Look at the conversation. The master said, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." Did the men admit they were idle, as the master told them? No. They just said, there was nobody interested in us. They may be idle or not, but what happened was that they were forgotten. They were neglected. They were left out. But not for this master. "You two, go to my vineyard." No more mention of wages. Just go. How different were they treated from the first two batches of workers who were promised exact or just amount of compensation. Sa Tagalog, we can call them pasang-awa. Sige na lang, pwede na kayo, kahit ganyan kayo. They were really at the mercy, the awa of the master when it comes to what wages they will get. But go, they did. When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also got the usual daily wage. The tension of the story is building up, and so we are getting close to the real message of the parable. The last hired were the first to get their wages. The second and the first batches also got theirs, with the first ones the last to be paid. The last workers received the usual daily wage, to which they did not agree to, but which the master intended to. This was the mercy of the master. Seeing this, those hired ahead of them were expecting to receive more since they worked more. They worked longer and harder. Beginning to compare themselves, they thought that since the last ones worked only 1 hour for their 12 hours, they should get 12 times more than the last workers hired. But no, each of them also got the usual daily wage of 1 denarius. And so, receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." This is the height of the tension, the real conflict, the climax of the story. The first hired workers were thinking in terms of standard social convention, the normal rules of compensation. If I worked more, I should get paid more. I gave more. I am entitled to receive more. But no, they were treated like everyone else. They received the usual daily wage, and so they grumbled against the unequal treatment of the landowner. They cried unfair. They felt really cheated. the landowner was so unjust to them. He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do as I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, and the first will be last." To his angry and resentful workers, the master said to one of them, "Friend, I didn't cheat you. I was not unfair to you." When there is anger and tension, we calm it down by befriending it. My friend. Secondly, the landowner master was neither unjust nor unfair. In the beginning, there was a contract, and they agreed to it. They would work the whole day and be paid the usual daily wage, 1 denarius. They received 1 denarius, so the agreement was followed. They received what was due to them, what was theirs. Thirdly, it was the master's money that they received, and the master could do with his money as he pleases. And here we can somehow understand the whole point of the workers' anger. They were not really after the other workers' money. They were eyeing or lusting for the money of the landowner. They wanted more money from the landowner. Here, the last words of the master were very revealing. Are you envious because I am generous? The translation of envious is correct, because the original Greek of that phrase is your eye evil because I am good? In the New Testament, an evil eye is an envious eye, a jealous eye, what they also call the lust of the eyes. The first hired workers were jealous of the master's money. They wanted his money, which in spiritual terms is representative of God's graces, His goodness. To be envious is to want to possess that which does not belong to you. They complained because they were envious. They wanted what God has. They were forgetting that they were only hired by the master in His vineyard, in His kingdom. And when you are in God's kingdom, rules change. The rules are different. This is because God is radically different from us. And this is the message of our first reading. Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call Him while He is near. Let the scoundrel forsake his way, and the wicked his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord for mercy, to our God, who is generous in forgiving. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. Very often, we mistake God's goodness to everybody as injustice or unfairness to us. Like, if you see a person so blessed by God, you become jealous and tell yourself, why does God bless others so much and me so little? And so you get jealous at others and angry at God. In God's domain, the rules of earthly compensation, justice, and inequality are taken over by God's providence and generosity. Does this mean that in God, justice and equality does not matter anymore? Of course they do. But they are not the highest and most compelling rules of life. In God's kingdom, the rule of life is God's justice, which is His mercy and love, where everybody is treated equal, and from where we receive our usual daily wage, which is more than enough to satisfy us. In God's kingdom, and this is the answer to Peter's overriding concern, the most important thing is to be called to belong to the kingdom. As in our parable, to work in the vineyard of the Lord. Because to be able to work in God's kingdom is the reward itself. St. Paul exhibited these sentiments in his letter to the Philippians, which is our second reading. And we conclude this reflection with these words of St. Paul. For to me, life is Christ, and death is gain. St. Paul was now at the point of his life when he was ambivalent whether to go on living or to face death, so to be with Christ, which was his preference. But thinking of the benefit of his Christians, he decided to go on living because, as he said, that is fruitful labor for me. And that is the correct attitude for someone laboring in the Lord's vineyard. To labor in God's kingdom is already the reward. For to labor is to be with the Lord. God bless us all.